Welcome, everybody. Um, Here we are, almost to the end of summer. Our last Monday um, in August, and we will have one more writing session in September, September 4th, um, and uh, we're sort of winding up this project of different approaches to writing and focusing that we've been doing all month, and it's really been so rich. And we're very, very happy to have Sondra Perl with us this morning. A big treat. Um, I was introduced to Sondra's work years ago. And when did your book come out, Sondra?
Well, I think not until 2005, but that's maybe 20 or more years prior I was doing this work. So the book was a later iteration of it, when it was possible to make CDs at that time that could.
Yes, yes.
The technology advanced enough for me to sort of deliver what are similar to focusing questions in a book form with a CD. A whole other story. So that was late in my doing this. I started doing this after I met Jean Genlin in 1978-ish.
Wow, that's quite wonderful. Well, I think he may have introduced me to your work, and it may have been in you know uh, I'm not sure when, but I loved it and wrote with it, and also assigned it to my various classes, even classes that weren't writing classes, that were focusing classes, because it's such a wonderful way of learning focusing.
Well, thank you.
So it's a very special treat to have you here with us. And I'm all ready with my pen and paper. So maybe, Sondra, you can tell us a little bit more about what you've been doing lately.
Okay, so again, I want to thank Lynn and the group that's organized this, and all of you for coming and inviting me here today to spend a little time with you. It's, as I said earlier to the planning group, being sitting in a group with people who take focusing into your hearts and into your work and into your life is really a privilege. And it's a really special, unique kind of process and understanding, and connects the mind and the body so deeply. So again, I feel very comfortable and at home here, and I'm really happy to spend the end of summer, gathering with you briefly, just to do some work together, some work and play. It's because it really is also playful. So thank you. Lynn asked me to introduce myself, and that could, I've done a lot of work so I'll try to do a brief overview. I also want to do to give you sort of the backstory to my work with focusing and writing. That's primarily what I'd like to do, but I also am going to ask a question in a little while and ask at least a handful of you to respond before we move forward. But a little bit about me. I was an English professor at the City University of New York, at Lehman College in the Bronx, and at the CUNY Graduate Center in Manhattan for just about 45 years. I retired about 5 years ago. So I was a full-time, academic, doing teaching writing primarily. And the process I'm going to talk about today, I used probably in almost every writing class I've ever had, from freshmen to doctoral students to teachers. So that work is very much a part of me. And the book, Felt Sense, Writing with the Body, which is available for free online, and we can either send you the link, or the planning team has the link. It was an outgrowth of that work. I was also, for many years, the director of something called the New York City Writing Project, which was a program that was for teachers teaching in the schools about progressive methods for teaching writing. Probably today those wouldn't even fit in today's curriculum, but that's a whole other story of what's happening in the schools. But for many years, I had the wonderful privilege and experience of working with teachers in schools in the city, also around the country, with writing. So a large part of my work, what I'm trying to, is professional development, particularly with teachers. As part of that work, part of CUNY, I was asked to work with teachers in Austria. I was invited to go to Austria to work with a bunch of teachers who were getting a master's degree from City College. And that was many years ago in the 90s. And that work led to a whole inquiry about the Holocaust and, being in Austria, working with children whose parents easily could have been somewhere Nazis, and trying to figure out how they would relate to me as a Jewish woman. And that led to a book called On Austrian Soil, Teaching Those I Was Taught to Hate. And it's a sort of teaching memoir that looks at my identity and what it was like for me to go into the land of people I was taught were my enemies. I also understood later on that Jean was born in Vienna and left Europe, as a result of the Holocaust. I don't remember now when he left, but it might have been in the 50s. In any event, the reason I mentioned that book is it led to what I'm still doing today, led to most of what I've done for the last 17 years, which is direct a program for teachers on teaching about the Holocaust and human rights. And that work exists at a website called TOLI. I'd have to give you the link, but it's an acronym for a Holocaust survivor, and this is her legacy. And that work is also with teachers, but in it, again, we use writing all the time. And the process that I created with Jean and et cetera was, I use that in that summer program as well. So when I say that, I mean, I'm looking for teachers to find their own voices and what it means to them to study the Holocaust and genocide, and that it is an academic subject, it is history, but it's also, how do you find your own place in that work? And for me, it's what I call these guidelines for composing help us anchor ourselves in the present moment, and also with whatever's brewing inside of us, which is something I'm sure you understand. And so what I think I'm partly saying is the work I did with Jean Genlin and the creation of what I call the guidelines, which goes back to, trying to think, this late 70s, early 80s, is still a part of me. I think that Jean's work has had a profound effect on my understanding of how we know what we know, and how learning and knowledge is grounded in the body. So I hope gives you some idea of the depth, the breadth, where I've been for the last, I've been over 50 years. I've been involved in doing this work. And I think that actually the Holocaust work, I think I will officially retire next year at 18 years, having done that. And a whole other way to think of myself, as when it's kind of daunting to not have the work that I've done for all these years, but I'm sitting with that now. And what does it mean? And turning the corner from sort of anxious and worried to beginning to see it as, wow, there's lots here that I've yet to explore. So in a transition at the very moment. So that said, if there were time, and there isn't, I would ask you each to tell me about yourselves and your names and what you do and how you use this. But I realize, as that will probably use up a little bit too much time. I'm just going to use your names on the screen, but I do want to ask a question. And instead of asking everyone, I will just ask, say, the first 3 or 4 people who you can use the raised hand icon, if you can do that, if you want to share something. But what I want to ask you is, how do you sort of explain or talk about felt sense, the concept of felt sense, to the people you work with? And I say that because in writing classrooms, when, if I want to introduce this work, that's to me how do you explain it? How do people begin to understand it? And I'm really curious, since all of you are working on one way or another with this felt sense, with this concept, with this idea, with these words. I would love, we can probably have time for, I think we have time for at least, well, 4 or 5 at the most people. If you have something to share, I would really love to hear it. So I'm going to call people who, if you don't know where the icon is, I'm sure Kristen can tell, someone can tell us, or you can just wave, but there are 2 screens. Okay, so first Ruth, and hi Charles. I haven't seen you in a while. Charles, and then I saw David raise a hand. So that's 3, and then we'll see who else. So Ruth, would you unmute?
Oh, yeah, sure. What a privilege it is to meet you. So I'll just let you know I'm Ruth Hirsch from Jerusalem. I've been teaching focusing for almost 30 years now. And I just love this group. So I am allergic to terms like felt sense, because what I found at the very beginning is people were always worried, is it a felt sense or isn't it? So what I do is I don't actually talk about it, but I give an example. And I usually use the example of imagining that you're walking down the street. I do a guided visualization in my first class of focusing basics and you see somebody you just really don't want to see. You're very busy and you see that person, and then just notice what happens inside and how might you describe it. And everybody gets it. And then you realize, oh, it's not that person after all. And you continue walking down and you see somebody who adores you, that really loves you, living, or maybe not even, no longer on the planet, or maybe you've never met, and notice how you feel and let that in. And then just say a word or 2 about how you might describe it. So right there, people get what a felt sense is, and they also get the handle without going into any jargon. So that's what I do.
I love it. That's fabulous.
Thanks for asking.
Super.
Yeah.
So there was someone second.
I think maybe Charles. Was it Charles?
There was someone before Charles, but I don't see things are popping around.
The video, for some reason, isn't coming on. When I turned the video, I just saw putting my image on. Maybe I'll have to come back on to get the video, because it just comes up blank and I'm not sure why.
Okay.
But I'll just talk with my image. Is that okay?
Sure. So it's Charles speaking, right? Yes.
Yeah. Charles,
okay.
You don't see me at all. You don't see the hand.
We see a picture. Yeah, I see a picture in a hand.
Yeah, that's all I can do right now. I have to get back on, I guess. But very quickly, I actually have not found it so difficult to communicate what a felt sense is. I've done it in elevators. I've done it. I just say, oh, you don't just live from your head, do you? You live with don't you feel in your gut? Don't you feel the situations in your life, in your body? It isn't just your head, right? And I have hardly met a person who doesn't say, of course. Of course, you don't just live from our head. Of course, I feel it in here. And I said, well, that's a whole sense. You can call it a felt sense because you're feeling it. But that's here right now. And that's what we're paying attention to. We're turning our attention to that and letting that come. And I don't find it takes too much more than that most of the time.
No, that's great. Thank you. It's wonderful, rich and full.
Yeah, thanks.
And paying attention to that, reminds me of Jean's way of speaking. So,
that.
Yeah, that.
Pointing to, and that it's not just in the head.
Yep.
It's our whole, we feel it in all of us.
I'm going to jump in for a minute and say that in my field, as writing process became a thing to study, and I will go into that a little bit more, there was a whole group that created the notion that writing is a cognitive process. And it was frustrating for me in that they define cognition as the mind. And to try to break into this sort of this idea that writing is cognition and it's higher order thinking, and there's short-term memory and long-term memory. Without the body, it was up against a sort of a monolithic way of thinking about how we know. And so absolutely right. And of course, it's not, we don't just think with our heads. It was one of the many points I wanted to make, particularly to people who teach writing, who, if you think it's only in your head, where do you go? And what does that mean? And all that. So thank you. And I know there was someone named David who had a raised hand or raising a hand. There you are, David. So
can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yes, I want to thank you. I was introduced to focusing in changes in Chicago in 1970, and I worked directly with Jen Lynn and Mary Hendricks. And I always valued and used your writing all the time. What I want to say, I run a group every week, and what I do is I go through the focusing steps and ask for a person's meaning of felt sense. So they give it to me. I don't lecture to them about what it is. And it really, and they describe the process of what it is for them. I mean, in a nutshell, it's a gut feeling. It's very, and it's changeable. And once they recognize it's changeable, it opens up all sorts of doors to them about their interactive life. But often people are, as myself, we're too much with self.
Too much, did you say too much with himself?
Yeah, we're too much with ourselves, with our demons.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I have to overcome for me, because I live alone. I'm here in Sheffield, and focusing has helped me get out of me being so much alone.
Wow, that's lovely.
Because I'm knowing I'm meant to be with someone else. And if the person isn't there, well, that's one of the challenges I face.
Yep. Well, thank you for that. And
well, thank you. Right from the beginning, I have your original article on Sondra Perl and writing.
Well, thank you for making it, for using it well. So thank you.
I hope so. You'll have to ask the people. Don't ask me, I'm biased.
Right, of course. And was there anyone else who wanted to jump in?
I just wanted to jump in with from the therapy point of view, introducing focusing to our clients. I love the way that Gene did that. He would say, as the person was talking about something, is that here right now, and touch his chest, and just that, is that here right now, does so much.
Yeah, no, it makes it very immediate, very visceral, very bodily. So it's great. It's great to be reminded of all that. So unless someone else wants to join, I'll go back to my plan. I don't see any other hands or waves. So, okay. Thank you for that. So as many of you, some of you know the early work, when I first wrote about this, it was an article called Understanding Composing, and that was in about 1980. And the more recent, not so recent anymore, but still available, is the book Felt Sense, Writing with the Body, where I had a deeper understanding of it. Then in 1980, it was sort of a hypothesis. It was about, well, is it possible that when we write, we also contact felt sense? So in the early 1970s, I was involved in three sort of concurrent things. One was I was already teaching writing at the City University. It was really an amazing time. You could get hired full-time as an instructor with a master's degree. And I was at a community college in the South Bronx. It had just opened. The students were all extremely diverse and mostly Black and Hispanic. And mostly came to a community college, which in those days, City University was free. You could come if you had a high school diploma of any kind. And nobody knew what it meant to write. I mean, if you looked at the written products of the students I had, they were studied with errors. They were not they were comprehensible, but not easily comprehensible. And so you would think these people can't write. They don't understand writing. That was one thing. So I'm teaching. I am young and energetic and in my early 20s and loving this. That's one piece. Two is I was getting a PhD. So I was teaching full-time, getting the PhD part-time at NYU. And I realized that most PhDs at that time, or actually historically in English, were degrees to allowed you to study and teach literature. So if you think about that, it was all about the finished product. You're reading a book, a novel, a poem, a play, whatever. And teachers were primarily taught how to analyze and critique finished work. There was no real understanding of how to teach writing or how to help people find their way through writing, because writing wasn't studied. It was only studied primarily, maybe in creative writing programs when people wanted to be writers, but not for the teaching of writing. And that was sort of what was in the air while I was teaching and in graduate school. And I realized that and then there were one or two people who had begun to do some work in asking the question, not what do students write, but how do they write? What is the process that writers go through in order to go from essentially a blank page to a finished work? What does that process look like? And the method that we used was to observe writers at work. So actually looking at the process itself. Now, since writing is also internal and you don't know what's going on when someone's writing, there was a kind of intervention that it's slightly artificial, but it managed to work. And that was to ask people to think out loud and tape them. So you could actually listen as people were, or I would say my students were trying to compose a piece of writing. So that was part of the method. I would tape them. And I'd have, when it was finished with the session, and there would be the written product and the tape of the person trying to write the product in the process of doing this. And we could talk about methodology, but basically there was a woman ahead of me who did this. She invented this. Her name was Janet Emig. She was at Harvard, and she did this with high school students. And then there was a man in New Hampshire named Donald Graves. He sort of looked at the process of second graders. So just these very beginning studies of how are kids, how are adults writing. And I decided I wanted to do research on the adults who were coming to CUNY who were really very unskilled. So that was going on simultaneously with my teaching. And the third thing was, as David mentioned, changes networks. And I thought we called it new changes at that point, but I got involved particularly at that time with a man who I later married and then way later divorced. But at that time, I was very enamored, and I met this man. He was in school getting a PhD in clinical psychology. He was also drawn toward philosophy, and he founded with Jean Genlin. And it was the early 70s, and they decided to set up a changes network, or called New Changes, particularly for Vietnam veterans in New York City, to learn focusing and listening. And he asked me if I wanted to join the group and learn how to do this. And I said, sure. And that's the early days is how I got to know Jean and meet Jean, was because we set up the New Changes Network in New York City. So that's the third piece. I'm also teaching focusing and listening. And in this free, we were going, free open setting. It happened to be at Baruch College in sort of in the 20s in Manhattan, was part of City University. So those three things came together. And I'll stop for a minute if anyone wants to jump in or comment or ask a question. If you want, just jump in. But if you want me to keep going, I'll keep going. So again, rich environment. And I'm getting more and more involved in this, collecting finding my topic and collecting the data, and then trying to analyze the tapes. And I'll skip all of that, but I ended up coming up with a coding scheme so I could try to analyze what were the moves, what were the mental moves that writers were making while they were writing. And I discovered a number of things that I could actually document. So the biggest finding of all was that writing was not a linear process the way we had been taught. So mostly, and probably some of us in school were taught you write an outline, you plan your piece, you write your piece, and then maybe you edit, maybe you fix it a little bit. But it was sort of taught as a lockstep, linear process. But when you watched anyone, almost most people write, you notice that it wasn't so linear. There was lots of going back. And so you could go back. So what did people go back? If you were given a topic, sometimes you'd mull the topic over in your head while you're composing the piece. You said, well, it's that, whatever. Or more often, not or, but and, you go back and reread little bits of discourse. Like you go back and read the prior paragraph or a prior word or a sentence. You sort of go back, and the going back sort of allows you to go forward. So again, it's much more back and forth than linear. And that was useful. It was a finding that, people understood and sort of critiqued this notion that you work in this lockstep manner. And, for most people, most of the time, maybe not always. I would sometimes say, if you've thought about something a lot in your head and then you sit down to write it, it may come out in one fell swoop because you've already gone back and back and back in your head. But the real crux, of this was there were moments in the tapes when the students were silent. They would just be quiet, and which made sense. I mean, they can't always just externalize your thought. And I kept asking, what's happening in the silence? Now, at the same time, I'm teaching focusing. And I was really just a question, could it be that in the silence, people are contacting a felt sense? That as they're sitting and they're not attending to the words on the page and they're not composing new text, they're just sitting silently. Could that be felt sense? And so the first article, Understanding Composing, was really posing it as a question because I couldn't prove it. It just was, maybe that's what's happening. And I got a lot of response to that article with people saying, you've described absolutely how I write. There's this back and forth and there's this quiet. And the quiet, again, I couldn't, document it exactly, but people seem to resonate with that idea. So I finished my dissertation. I'm doing my teaching writing. I moved from a community college to a senior college. I'm teaching teachers, and begins to dawn on me that what if I took the focusing questions and adjusted them minimally to gear them to people who are not in a therapeutic situation, who are not just speaking with a focusing guide or a helper, but they want to write. What if we use them in classrooms to help students basically find topics or issues or questions that are important to them? Because half of most of what makes writing powerful, right, is when you write what you care about, when you write from your heart, when you're, so much of writing in schools was the teachers giving someone a topic, which you can also contact a felt sense, of course, about any topic. You can ask, where is that for me, and et cetera. But I was hoping to help students create writing that they came from a place in them where it was grounded and important. So the main way I was using the focusing, what I'm going to call the guidelines for composing, was to help students find something to write about that mattered, and to really see if they could come up with a word, a phrase, or an image, that kind of grounds the topic for them or opens up the topic for them, and then to explore that in writing. And that's, so I'm distracted because I'm home with my puppy and now he's asking for attention. Let me check the time. All right. Okay. I don't know what to do with you right now. Okay, here you go. let's see. Oh, he left because I gave him something he shouldn't chew on. So, but to do this, so if I was going to do this, I wanted permission from Gene. It was okay to do this, and he was very excited about it. And I worked with him off at particularly a time when he had an apartment in New York City on the West Side. He was in New York for a while. This is not sure when this was now. I'd have to go back and think about it. But in any event, I started using these, not in a published form, but with teachers in around 1980. And then teachers got excited about them and they brought them into classrooms. And I guess that was the trajectory was we kept using them. But yeah, I would do it at a workshop and people would say, I wish we could take you home with us. I wish we had your voice. Because it's, when you open the space for someone to focus, you're holding the space, you're guiding them, but it's gentle and it's open and invitational, and most people would resonate with that, even in a classroom. And, I would never do it the first day I met students. I would want to develop some trust first. We'd want to do other things, but maybe in the third week of a semester, I'd say, let's do this process. And that would often give them a lot of material to then decide, is this something I want to work on? Is this something I want to share? And there was always the opportunity, of course, the choice not to share if it became too personal. Mostly people were very mindful of, they didn't go to the places that were too hard. They sort of found a middle ground. But in any event, I didn't have any way to make it available to people because there wasn't the technology. But eventually, when CDs were on the market, it dawned on me I could tape this, and I could, it would be a way for people to take my voice with them. So I remember I had a publisher named Heinemann. I went to a studio and we recorded but let me back up and say the guidelines themselves then I worked on with Gene, and we talked about how to make the move from sort of setting aside everything to asking an open question to what you don't know, and uncertainty, and engaging with a felt sense. And so it was really, they follow the logic of focusing, although they're not quite exactly the same as focusing. And towards the end of the process, there are some questions about form. And, I don't think we necessarily start out to write a poem or a letter, well, maybe a letter or an essay. It's just, there's material, there's meaning. We make meaning. Was that a comment or that was just a noise? Okay. But often in the process of going through these guidelines, it seems to me that form emerges, and we are often surprised that what the piece wants to be is a poem, or the piece wants to be a narrative of some sort. But I don't think we know that ahead of time. I think that partly the content helps us figure out, tells us what shape it most wants to be. So there's questions about form and point of view and shape towards the end. So they're really geared, again, to a piece of writing, not necessarily to solving a problem or getting a step in some emotional moment. It's geared to text. And that made it safe for teachers also to be able to do this in classrooms, I think. Anyway, it was wonderful working with Gene and getting this down, and then making the CD. And so then when my kids were young then, and I came back and I'd gone to New Hampshire to Heinemann to make the CD, and it finally comes in the mail and we put it on, and all they knew of CDs was that they were music. So there was this sort of, Mom, that's your music? It was a very, Mom, CD has arrived and it's totally boring. So that was let me just see if there's anything else here. Yeah, that sort of takes you through the method, the process that I went through to create the felt sense writing with the body. as I said, I mean, there were many people who teach writing who immediately understood this makes enormous sense, and I want to use it with my students. The CD also has a place that's self-guided, so anyone can use it at home and guide yourself through it. It was created for classrooms, so there's a short version that with classroom in New York City, classrooms are 42 minutes or had been. So you could fit it into a 40-minute classroom, and then there's a 60-minute version, but mainly it just means when you're pausing, you can give people more or less time to write. So again, guided process. And it's, when I was using it with graduate students, that's when that's when the book, I was able to write the book. And then more recently, my students said, we should put this on a website and just be available. So they mounted it on a website at the CUNY Graduate Center. It's still there. And so the book is there. My delivering the guide in my voice is there. There's a little video overview, and that's writing with the body. And from time to time, we've talked about putting it on the focusing website, but we still could. Somehow I'm not sure where that ended up. And then I think I want to pause and ask people to respond or ask questions or share your own experience, but I feel like I've talked a lot. So people want to raise hands or just unmute and jump in, that would be fine. Okay, David again.
Yes, Sandra, I've been writing my autobiography. I've gotten stuck. And I don't know, I was doing it every day for months, but all of a sudden, I want to get back to it, but I just don't know how to get back to writing it again. I go through it and correct some details. That helps, but I really need to get into it to continue writing. Any suggestions?
I mean, I guess I mean, not off the top of my head.
Go ahead.
I mean, I'm trying to figure out whether it's a question like what's in the way, what's the stuckness all about?
Yeah. It's something about what's in the way. It has something to do with me valuing myself that I know.
So so there's a stopping, there's a somehow not yet trusting that there's value in this for you or in telling this to others.
Yes, that's right. So, but I've done it because I want to show people who I am and what I've done. And Jenna and I really a lot happened between us in when I was doing my work in Chicago.
So maybe writing about the stuckness is part of the journey. It's who you are.
Yeah, so maybe I should start writing about the stuckness. Okay, that's interesting.
Be interesting to see where that goes. I mean, that's in the way, and yet you can engage it, right?
Yeah, I'll try that. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Mostly just listening, right?
Yes, that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Yeah, and the second part of writing workshops for me is always then listening, and teaching people a lot about how to say back what they hear. Gene had so much to say about that, about, he often says, and this is, when we start out, we're not really writing what we want to write. We're like miles away, and we have to kind of inch our way closer to the real stuff. Like it's not, which is why teachers trying to fix a draft of a student, like those words are like in cement, when those words are not really the words. Those words are just the surface. So let's get beneath those words. So he had lots of wonderful things to say about writing. Anyway, Donata, you have a hand up.
Well, I'm first of all very excited to meet you. We are a bunch of philosophers and interdisciplinary researchers that experiment a lot with thinking at the edge with our students. So I wanted to ask you about that. If you also drew on these moves. And then I also wanted to ask you, in which fields the process that you developed, was used, also in philosophy or so. And then I just want to share with you a personal observation of my colleague, a philosopher colleague, and me. We both kind of put this research initiative, out there to engage focusing and thinking at the edge in interdisciplinary research. But what we find is that since we know focusing, it becomes more difficult to write philosophically.
And so
we don't really know
more about that. Why? What makes it more difficult?
No, we still haven't found out the crux of this. I mean, it's a really intriguing question. I just wanted to put it out there, and maybe connected to the question also, in which fields this method has really worked to, yes. So please.
Well, thank you. I have an early copy of Thinking at the Edge, and haven't thought about it in a while. At the last chapter of my little book, Writing with the Body, I try to engage sort of what it means to be embodied knowing. What is the concept of embodied knowing, and what does it mean to know in our bodies? And how that's a refutation of postmodernism and a refutation of nihilism. And those were ideas I was enamored, it was sort of taken with, but I don't think I've done very much with it. Not sort of, I think I could always grasp what Jean was writing about, and, going back to experiencing and the creation of meaning. So for me, the work where it was important to me was the question of how do we make meaning of our lives? And writing for me is always a meaning making process. So Thinking at the Edge, engaging the not known, what is not known. I mean, that's about that intrigued me. I didn't stay with those ideas. I didn't pursue it. So that's all I can say about that. In terms of fields, most of the teachers I work with are history and English teachers. And I'm thinking that those who have taken this particular guided process into their classrooms or use it themselves in writing dissertations have found it really useful, but they're mostly humanities fields. And I don't know anyone outside of the teachers, that I work with, again, and some are teachers of ethics, some are teachers of religion. But the process is not geared to a field. It's a way of thinking, right? So it could be used, I would say, in any field if people are looking to find a connection to a topic, and to advance their ideas and get it a little closer to who they are in their own voices. And I don't know what's different about philosophic writing that would make this so hard, but because I don't know. It's a really interesting question.
Yes, it's an interesting question. I don't want to take more space about that, but maybe we can connect another time, and
sure.
I find it very valuable. Yes.
Great.
Thank you very much. So
there's a hand up in and no video with Meg.
Yes. Can you hear me? I'll turn on my,
Yep.
Oh, wait, let's see. Does that turn on my video? I'll turn on my video. I'll frighten you all. Where the hell is it? Because I need the video for what I'm going to say.
Sure.
So I'm sorry. I hope I'm not sidetracking, because this isn't about philosophy, but I had two things I wanted to say that I thought would be of interest about body sensing. I spent 20 years as a technical writer and editor, and I've written about 70 books about computers. Nobody ever wanted to read them. And I spent, of course, 3 years full-time editor. I also spent 3 years as a stand-up comic. And now I want to talk about two things. First of all, I teach a workshop for people who want to be more expressive in comedy, public speaking, etc. And here's something I found out by accident. I won't tell you the backstory of how I stumbled into this. But if you want to maybe increase experiment with your body feel, it can be very useful to turn on a lecture, go to the radio, turn on a lecture, listen to some verbal stream of interest to you, and stand up. By the way, you got to pull down the shades when you do this. And as the verbal stream comes at you, perhaps a scientist, a musician, act out everything they're saying. Do Tai Chi to represent either emotionally or representationally what they're saying. This is a way of massively paying attention in hearing, but it also lets other people mute those constraints that have been telling you for 40 years to shut up your body, because you're essentially dancing, Tai Chi, and acting. And it's funny. You'll break out laughing. It's great fun. So that's
that sounds fabulous. And you would do it with any piece of written, any oral thing, like a novel or a biography or anything at all.
Yes, to your own taste. I'm a big science fan.
Mm-hmm.
Loved listening to scientists, writers, poets, but mostly scientists. But anybody who's intelligent, has a brain, and is giving usually a monologue. I found monologues where the host lets the person talk a long time, and where you can't see them. You don't want, at this exercise, you don't want to look at them.
Mm-hmm.
You're allowing yourself to be fully present to yourself. Here, Sondra, talk for 20 seconds about horses.
Horses makes me think of Geraldine Brooks's novel called Horse, which is an incredible historical fiction. And having met Geraldine Brooks, having had her part of our book group to talk with us about it, also found her to be charming.
Okay, that's enough. But that was an example of a monologue coming at you, mm-hmm. and expressing it with your whole body, whether you loved it or you hated them or you're wildly confused, but allow your entire body. I mean, large scale, where in conversation, you might move your hand 3 inches. Mm-hmm. In this exercise, you move your hand up a yard.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, it's a variation of an old acting technique David Niven writes about, one of his bio. And now I want to talk about something that happened accidentally. And those of you who are editors or writers, you might want to try this. By a fluke, a friend of mine wrote a book. And she asked me to come to her house and edit it. And I said, okay. It was a very simple book. It turned out to be a quite wonderful book, but very simple. Actually, the title of the book was How to Pay a Compliment. And I thought, how the hell can you write a whole book on? So I went up to her house, sat down Saturday morning at coffee, and my friend said, oh, and this is my good friend Ellen. She's an editor too, so I'm hoping you can edit the book together. I thought, really? But Ellen and I much cherished the author. And so we agreed, okay, Ellen, you read 2 or 3 paragraphs and I'll mark the manuscript. You mark what you want. And then I'll take over. I'll read 2 or 3 paragraphs. So we'll talk out loud. And if we're both stumped, whatever. But that was our method. We thought we'd try that. So we did that for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And then our friend, the author, broke out laughing. He said, what's the story? And our friend, the author, said, you two are not looking at each other. You're looking at the manuscript. You have no idea. You are mirror images of each other. You're both waving your hands in the same way. You're both frowning. It's like each of you is a mirror image of the other in your body movements, in your facial expression. Luckily, Ellen and I guess we're very much the same type of editor. I'm a very visceral editor. I almost dance the text when I'm editing it, so I can feel it in my body to make. Anyway, so there were two things, the large reenactment, and they both drag in the body, but I thought that was so amazing.
Hmm,
To
that's
have two
fascinating.
people editing a manuscript and they're both doing the same Tai Chi. It's like intellectual, emotional Tai Chi.
Mhm.
And we were both very experienced editors, so we're really, anyway, thank you for the opportunity to say that.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to try the movement with listening. So it's great. Thank you.
I'm thinking that we should probably go into the breakout rooms in about 5 minutes, and we need to give Dorothy a chance to read the poem. So just holding the time here, and
Okay,
maybe
so
yeah.
Can we just give Roberta a minute or two to say what she wanted to say with her hand up?
Yes,
And then
yes.
no more for now, and we'll resume later.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Sondra, this is so fascinating. I did not grow up with books or writing or any of the things that one thinks one needs in order to have an interest in writing. And it's only now that I've retired from more of an academic life myself and as a social worker that I've started to write. And I just want to say I'm also an astrologer. So I hear, I love what you're saying about that it's not a linear process, that you mentioned it's a lockstep. You go back, which allows you to go forward. And immediately I thought of the waves. Waves go back in order to go forward. In other words, and it's ruled by something much more, the tides are ruled by this much larger concept or field, right? So this sense of really deeply connecting with the cosmos, let's say. I know that sounds kind of far out, but I'm just saying this kind of powerful inner backwards and forwards, just like you're standing on the shoreline. And I so appreciate you bringing it out, because I love that place. I love going to the beach and just standing there with your feet waiting for that back and forward place.
Beautiful.
And then I just wanted to say too that right now the planet Mercury is actually in retrograde motion, meaning it's supposedly going backwards. It isn't in actuality, but from that point, it's a great time to write. It's a perfect time to be, most people say the only thing you should do when Mercury is retrograde, shouldn't be going forward with anything. You should be retreating and regrouping and returning and the whole concept of going backwards.
Well, thank you, because I think that's a perfect segue to.
Yes.
I know, thank you. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dorothy, who has.
Thank you.
And the poem is going to serve kind of as a prompt for the writing, if you choose to use it. And then we'll be in breakout rooms, right? So people know how that works.
Yeah.
Very quickly, I wanted to thank you, Sondra, for bringing up Donald Graves, because he was like my hero when I was a learning specialist at Cathedral School. I don't know where I discovered him, but the 5th grade teacher and myself borrowed a car and drove up to New Hampshire, and he hadn't published his book, The Teaching of Writing, yet. And he gave us all his drafts, and we went back to Cathedral School and just excited everybody with this process. So it's great to hear his name.
And he was a mentor and a wonderful, wonderful man and teacher. Really super.
Yeah. So thank you.
Great.
So this poem is called Homage to My Hips by Lucille Clifton. These hips are big hips. They need space to move around in. They don't fit into little petty places. These hips are free hips. They don't like to be held back. These hips have never been enslaved. They go where they want to go. They do what they want to do. These hips are mighty hips. These hips are magic hips. I have known them. I have known them to put a spell on a man and spin him like a top.
So Lynn, did you this is the time to turn this over to what's ever next, right? But I guess, and let me just say, so that's, in my mind, that's people could pick up on that. Maybe we should hear it one more time.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
It's very
And then
short.
Christine will put people into breakout rooms, and we just want to remind people, if you need to leave, leave before you accept your breakout room, so you're not abandoning anybody.
And this is a response to a poem is, whatever, if you want to use the poem or a word in the poem or a phrase in the poem to start your own writing, that's fine. If you want to go somewhere else, that's fine, right? And the timing on this is?
Yes, that we'll come back, we'll write together, we'll come back at 9:30. So we'll have about 15 minutes. I'm just thinking, I wonder if maybe, since we're going to be writing, we don't need to be in the breakout rooms. We would just write together and then come back and share whatever. What do you think of that, Sondra?
Sure, I think that would be great. I've done that during the pandemic with teachers. We just sit and write together, and then sure, on Zoom, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yep.
So
nice. we'll just be together, and we'll have about 10 minutes to write, or 8 minutes to write, or something like that. What?
Is there sharing involved in this? A few people, or not?
Well, after the writing, then we usually have the sharing after the breakout room. So then we'll share, and
we have 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay, good.
So Dorothy could read the poem again, and then we can just do a little bit of writing.
Yeah, sounds great to me.
Okay. Homage to My Hips by Lucille Clifton. These hips are big hips. They need space to move around in. They don't fit into little petty places. These hips are free hips. They don't like to be held back. These hips have never been enslaved. They go where they want to go. They do what they want to do. These hips are mighty hips. These hips are magic hips. I have known them to put a spell on a man and spin him like a top.
Thank you.
So now we'll just tune in to whatever is there for us and write from that for 10 minutes, and we'll come back together at 9:25 and discuss and share.
So Lynn, you want to invite people to share, or I see Charles has a hand up? Maybe people who want to share can raise a hand. Should we just jump in?
Yeah, I think we should just jump in.
I'm going to ask Olivia to go first. It's nice to have a voice we haven't heard yet.
Thank you, Sondra. I was using the time reading your guideline, and I really appreciate that. And I feel like it gave me kind of a way I can keep moving forward. So this is a question I want to ask. I find myself usually in touch with the felt sense, organically put into words and come back forward. But the most challenging part is I have a purposeful topic I want to share with people. Like, how do I organize it? Like, I feel like my materials can keep expanding, and the felt sense can keep going deeper. And then later I got a giant material pile. I find the structuring, how to kind of make them together into a more concise piece to share, is the hardest challenge. Yeah. So I wonder if I have anything to share about that.
All I would say briefly is that for me is when response groups come in, and when getting feedback from others to say what they hear as the core or the center, or what could be in a second piece or go later. But sometimes you can't see it yourself, and it's to have listeners who are attuned to what you can sort of talk out what you want this to be and who it's for. But I would want to get feedback and just take it very gently and lightly to see, what would someone else advise?
Thank you. Very helpful.
So I'm curious if anyone wants to share what they just wrote. And so David and Charles are our two big responders. I'm going to make space for anyone else. So is that Shashi?
I will read what I wrote. It's called My Garden. From the bedroom, from the kitchen, from the dining room, from the patio, is all pervasive, just like the garden of my mind and its weeds. Flowers bloom and fade, ideas come and go. I age and season like an old, well-established garden. I grow in beauty.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
I think it was inspired by the poem on hips.
Yeah.
Hips.
Yeah. Yeah. Victor.
Okay, I think it's like a couple of little poems. The right of writing, the ceremony of making up, going through, starting with something, ending with nothing, and the other one related. I start with a task to write. I finish with an inspiration. This is the end. This is the beginning.
Very generative.
Yes.
The ending is not the ending, it's the starting. Anyone else?
Oh, should I try it now?
Sure. And then Laura, I saw a hand.
Okay,
So sure, David.
I think I broke through my stuckness by
Wonderful.
the idea came to create a website and break up my autobiography into different sections and start to put each section into the website as I go. And that's cracked it, really.
Wow.
Because
Congratulations.
I have so much I've done so much. I'm 80, see, I've done so much. And I think it'll work. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, delighted. And I know people are applauding for you. So people who know you are very clearly happy to see and hear that. It's great. Thank you. Laura, did you want to say something or share something?
Yeah. And I've used your guidelines for about 3 or 4 years with a focusing partner, and it's such a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
These breasts lead the way. They're full of milk, of nurturing. They impress on others as much as the soft outlines of my face and expression. These breasts say multiples. They diminish me from the fashionable world. They keep me on the edges of relevancy as a sexual object. They suggest Bubby, Grandma, Mother Earth. For me, they're too loud. I hold them back, not trusting them to lead, but making them smaller, as if I could. These breasts are the biggest thing about me. When I don't want to be big, when I want to hide, I can't hide. These breasts are heavy. I slump forward, carrying them like a full bag of groceries. My back curved, my chin jugging out to balance the whole load. Neck, trying to compromise, negotiating between, adjusting for the weight of head and the slump of body. So much tension riding on neck. Neck tightens itself up to do its job. Maybe a firm, fixed structure will support both head and body. Ah, neck, you are the part where I find myself. I recognize your dilemma, your intent, your struggle. Your attempts to support by becoming stiff and immobile. Choosing to hold as still as you can, a marble support, now a medical condition, a dystonia.
Wow.
Beautiful, amazing.
Ooh,
Yes.
wow.
Vulnerable and revealing, and thank you. Just amazing piece.
If you would put that in the chat, Laura, I would love to be able to read it. It's very powerful.
You're
Hi,
lucky.
Laura.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd love to hear the response from the press. I'd love to hear what they said back to you. Now that I've broken the silence, I don't know. I don't know what the context is, but I just have this wonder of what it would feel like to have non-embodied writing. When I heard you talking, Sondra, around so long back around meeting Gendlin, and knowing just even his voice, hello, hello. And I'm wondering, that we almost could channel him. I just feel that sense of connection and that it defies time. There's a quick story. I was on a line with him once, and I said, I remember that when someone's father died, and Gene got very emotional, and he said, yes, there was only one person that I wanted to talk to when his own father died. So there's something about transcending time and space, and I'm just really wondering how you would touch into the love that was here for just not just for one man, but for the man that opened up those portals for us. So
yeah,
that's my
evoking his presence is.
Yes, I wonder. I think it's here, but it's the mystery of between death and life. It's like, yeah, it's just we're so linear. We think we need bodies. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? So I know there were Charles, you had a hand up earlier, and I see this. There's still a little bit of space available. Did you want to share?
Oh, I only just wanted to comment. I've been so blown away by what people have been writing. I feel a little, but in any case, I just want. There's something magical about writing. We could spend 10 minutes alone, but something in the group does something, and I'm just appreciating that. I was experimenting. I have been working with a man and a woman who are getting married, and I thought, how do I get to sense that they're feeling on their morning of their wedding? And I thought, well, one device might be, since I'm a therapist, might be what would it be like for them to each come and have a session in the morning before they get married? And what would it be like for me to listen to them? And what would they have to tell me? So I was playing with that and just allowing myself to go into that. And 10 minutes was just the beginning.
Wow. That's great.
Just a device for allowing myself to sort of listen with that openness that we listen when we're being with somebody. Thank you.
No one else wants to read. I'll read.
Can I say something, Sondra, before you read?
Absolutely.
I just want to say, listening, focusing is an embracing and noticing going forward, but listening to other people or poems is focusing in reverse. If you really tune in, you become their experience. Just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Anyone want to comment or respond? We have a few minutes left.
Let's hear your poem.
Okay. All right. Such power in her words. Free hips that have never been enslaved. Mighty hips, magic hips. What would it feel like to be so free in one's body? I never knew that. Was raised to hide, not to flaunt, to conceal, not to celebrate. I would love to have mighty hips, magic hips, to never be enslaved. That was part one. Part two. I'm reading a memoir about a woman who is leaving a Hasidic sect where women's bodies are totally hidden by head coverings, once married, by wigs, by long skirts and itchy wool socks, where bodies are shunned and enslaved. Part 3. I am most free, most mighty, immersed in hot water, sitting naked in my hot tub. So that was fun.
Yeah.
Does that encourage anyone else to a final poem or reflection? Is that Mary?
You
Oh,
encouraged me.
Sorry, Dorothy, I didn't see your, it was hidden your hand, but okay, Mary and Dorothy. And that may bring us to the end.
The words that came out of the poem for me were the big hips, the free, go, do, mighty, magic, spin them like a top. Power, boomsa daisy, fling it, baby, go where you like. Woman, spendthrift, pirouetting across a wide stage, men sent flying. No, I said no, none of that. More of this. This is what I want. Is this what I want? Is this what I want? Say what you want. Come out of your cage, fling wide the door. It's not locked, you know, not anymore. No more of that. Say no. Just say no. Leave the stage to the actors. Choreograph your own understanding.
Wow. Wonderful. Lots of power in that. Yeah. Okay, Dorothy. I'm not mute. You're still muted.
I'm not little. At 13, I'm tall. Maybe string bean like, but tall. Stand up, my mother sternly commands, putting her hand in the small of my back. Decades later, I keep losing inches, 5'7.5" to 5'7", and shrinking to 5'4". Knowing the height meter keeps shrinking to 5'4", but I lie, knowing the height meter tells a different story. You shrank too, Mom, so small in your 90s. What was that like for you? Another one of those questions I never asked her. Or more likely, I did ask, and she said, oh, it's not important, feelings. Just live in the moment and be content.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Mm.
So Liz.
Can I do one? I know it.
Well, again, I think we have till so sure.
Very short. Here it is.
Yep.
Speaking of hips, one of mine is titanium. It's an old person thing. I have some other metal in my body too. For example, there is a ring on my finger that is platinum. It means my intention is to love this one person until the first one of us dies, which he assures me is going to be me. There is an ass in assures. My hips put a spell on him once, and I'm trying to keep that ball in the air, but I get tired pretty easily now. Luckily, so does he.
Wonderful.
When Dorothy was looking for poems for this session, and when she sent me a few to say, what do you like and what would you want? And when I read the one on hips, I just thought there's so power but lighthearted. It made me laugh, and I thought, wouldn't that be let's see what happens if we can, if we hear the poem. And these are just perfect responses, all of them, but he made me laugh. So wonderful, really wonderful. And I know lots of people are nodding in, resonance and shared sense of that. So just lovely. So Lynn, I should turn it back to you for whatever you do next.
Yes, well, it's time to stop, and Liz is going to be our facilitator for next week. And this is a wonderful transition into our final week next week of writing. And we're really looking forward to it, Liz. And Sondra, I just want to say thank you so very much. And I hope that you'll come back sometime and do this with us again.
I would be
really
delighted
very
to.
special.
Yeah. Well, it was really, as I said, great to be with all of you, and wonderful, for me to be here. So I just want to say thank you.
Well, thank you all, and have a lovely end of summer, and we'll see you next week in September, believe it or not.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.